Hello and welcome to Tov TV's podcast, Israel How to Win. Everyone and then we encounter a personality that needs to confront intolerance in the academia and other fields, and those instances from time to time bring those personalities and with them an entire audience to very interesting insights. Such a person with us tonight is Professor Francisco Gil-White from UPenn, who quite some time ago introduced to his colleagues in Philadelphia some insights about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and this caused a sequence of events that we will not only discuss in the next 45 minutes, but also try to analyze the insights and the ideas that came to be due to this conflict. Professor Gil-White, it's a great honor to have you here. Welcome to Israel. First of all, let's begin with with knowing you and becoming familiar with the experience that led you to deal and to research the Arab-Israeli conflict. So what happened back then in UPenn?
Well, I was hired at UPenn in the psychology department as an expert on racism and the psychology of racism and ethnic conflict, because that was the subject of my PhD dissertation. But I was not an expert on the Arab-Israeli conflict when I arrived. I had written a very general thesis on racism. I produced a new theory to explain the origin of racism at UCLA, and that became interesting for the UPenn psychology department, and also for a new think tank that UPenn had created as a joint project of the psychology department and the political science department.
So basically what you guys were discussing is what in someone's personality gets him to become a racist, or allows him to develop racist ideas.
So I was trying to explain what it is about the cognitive design of human psychology that makes us so vulnerable to the political entrepreneurship of racists, right? What is it about the way we perceive the world, the social world?
Why is racism sexy? Why is it appealing?
That's one way to say it. Why is it so easy for racist political entrepreneurs to mobilize people? That's the question I wanted to understand. And that's what became interesting for UPenn, but I wasn't specifically focused on the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, as I said, I was hired in the psychology department, but also given a fellowship in the Solomon Asch Center for Study of Ethnopolitical Conflict, which was a joint program of poli-sci and psychology. And at that think tank, the Arab-Israeli conflict was very important. It was among a few subjects, the most important one that they were studying. And they were quite focused on the Oslo process. So once there, I developed an interest in the Arab-Israeli conflict specifically. And I began studying the history of the Zionist movement on the one hand and the Arab-Palestinian movement on the other hand. Before I started doing my own historical research, my position was in favor of the two-state solution, so-called, because my reality was conditioned by what I was reading in the New York Times and hearing on CNN and so forth. And also by the presentations of the academics that worked at the think tank.
And in terms of racism, is it fair to say that the premise in all those outlets that you mentioned and others is that if there is a racist in this conflict, it is the Jews, the Zionists, that practice colonialism and ethnic cleansing, either by actions or by motivation, upon the disenfranchised native Palestinians of this land. This is the narrative, this is the premise in which academics and journalists in the States, in the mainstream media in the States, discuss this conflict.
Yeah, well, not only in the mainstream media, but in the universities, right? So professors in the social sciences and humanities almost universally insist on the model where the Arab-Israeli conflict is a consequence of Jewish intolerance, Jewish conquest,
supremacy,
Jewish supremacy, Jewish intransigence with cooperating with the national aspirations of the Arab Palestinians and so forth. This was the dominant model And it was also my model because I was learning it from these academics who worked at the think tank and also from the mainstream media. So, but when I started doing my own historical research, what I found, and I found this in just a couple of weeks of work, I mean, it was all in the library and on the internet, is that the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, Haj Amin al-Husseini, had actually organized enormous terrorist attacks against the Jews of the Yishuv, in other words, the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine before the creation of the State of Israel. And the fourth terrorist attack organized by Husseini, again, the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, called the Arab Revolt. This went from 1936 to 1939. That terrorist attack was organized with weapons sent by Adolf Hitler and Mussolini. And after that, he traveled to Iraq, where he was treated as if he were some kind of head of state. Mm-hmm. They made him into some kind of cabinet minister with a budget and a bureaucracy. And he used that power to organize the Farhud, which was the destruction of the Jewish community in Baghdad. And then he travels to Italy, where Mussolini receives him as a head of state, and to Berlin then, where Adolf Hitler receives him also as a head of state with all the pomp and circumstance and the cameras rolling and all the dignitaries out to receive him. And they had a very important meeting. They sat to plan together the extermination of the Jews living in the Middle East. Now that didn't happen because the Nazis were stopped at El Alamein in Egypt, but Husseini remained in Europe for the duration of the war. He arrived in late 1941, in the autumn of 1941, and he remained there. And he played a leading role. He was also given a cabinet position. He was given a bureau. It was called Bureau des Gros Mufti. It was a bureaucracy that he ran.
But it was a part of the SS. It was the part of the Reich's government. It wasn't civilian. It was a military position.
Yes, and he was recruiting thousands of Muslims to Heinrich Himmler's SS. Right. So he recruited thousands of Muslims to giant divisions of the SS that participated in the Yugoslav chapter of the Holocaust. And he also had a leading role in the administration of the death camp system together with Adolf Eichmann. So we're talking about, again, the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, a man who escaped justice after the war and in the 1950s created Al-Fatah, which is Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas's organization.
So before we move on, there is one fact that in my eyes is important to fulfill this story, and that is the fact that he and Eichmann had practical blueprints for in the Valley of Dothan, in northern Israel, to be implemented if Rommel eventually would have won in El Alamein and conquered Palestine, land of Israel.
That is correct.
So they had actual blueprints in the name of the Palestinian ideology to implement the Holocaust here to the Yishuv, to the Jews that inhabited Israel at those years.
That is correct. And what that establishes is that the Arab-Palestinian leadership was always interested in genocide against the Jews, and they succeeded. The Arab-Palestinian movement succeeded together with the German Nazis in exterminating the European Jews, but they couldn't carry out the same plan in the Middle East precisely because the Nazis were stopped at El Alamein. Right. But once I learned all of this, and also the fact that Husseini was the creator of, was the mentor of Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and had created the organization that we now call the Palestinian Authority.
Let's specify, because people who are not from here and are not scholarly are not familiar with the fact that his position in Palestinian discourse is that of Alexander Hamilton in American discourse.
Correct.
Okay, he is a founding father of the Palestinian ideology.
That's right.
And if and when there will be a state, he will be considered a visionary of this Palestinian state.
That's
so
right.
he still enjoys a very distinguished position in
the memory of the Arab-Palestinian movement. That's absolutely right. The people running the Arab-Palestinian movement remember Husseini fondly. That is to say, they are proud of the founding father of their movement, who was the top exterminator of the European Jews, together with Adolf Eichmann, right? So when I learned that the Palestinian movement had worked hand in hand with the German Nazis to exterminate the European Jews, and that the founding father of the movement was the creator of PLO Fatah, which we now call the Palestinian Authority, the organization that was brought into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state via the Oslo process, right? When I learned all of that, I changed my mind, because before that I had been a supporter of the two-state solution. But once I saw all of this, I had two questions on my mind. I was like, why wasn't I told any of this? This was my first question, because it seems to me that everything I was learning was completely relevant to interpreting what was really going on in the Middle East, what the Arab-Israeli conflict was about. It seemed completely relevant, right? So why wasn't I ever told any of this? Because my research showed me that Haj Amin al-Husseini had been world famous in the prelude to, during, and even immediately after World War II. Everybody knew who he was. There were British parliamentarians in the House of Commons screaming that Husseini had to be tried in the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal for crimes against humanity, right? Everybody knew who he was. They were complaining that he was not being tried, right?
So one of my lines on this issue that is strongly rejected in Israeli media and in front of American audience, to which I speak from time to time, is that the PLO and the PA are currently the only living branch of the trunk that was the Nazi party. The Nazi party was destroyed. It is completely irrelevant in global politics right now, except from the PLO and the PA.
You're wrong about that.
Am I wrong about it? Okay. So correct me, please.
You're wrong about that, because Christopher Simpson documented historian Christopher Simpson documented in 1988 that the CIA was created by absorbing tens of thousands of German Nazi war criminals. Tens of thousands. Don't confuse this with Operation Paperclip, which was to bring about 1,000 scientists for NASA. No, that's not what I'm talking about. This is a
Nazi
separate
ideologues?
No, this is the entire intelligence infrastructure of Foreign Armies East, Fremde Heer Oost, which was run by Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen. Okay, so what Christopher Simpson did is he managed to obtain a bunch of documents through the Freedom of Information Act that allowed him to establish that immediately after the war, instead of, once they captured Reinhard Gehlen, instead of trying him in Nuremberg, they asked him to recreate Hitler's intelligence infrastructure in Eastern Europe, and they absorbed it, and that became the CIA. Okay? But not only that. In 1956, this is still mostly unknown. In 1956, the CIA told the West German government that they now had to adopt the Gehlen organization as their own CIA, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, which is the BND, the equivalent of the CIA in West Germany. Reinhard Gehlen became the head of intelligence with his Gehlen org in West Germany. In other words, the German Nazis were returned to clandestine power in West Germany by the United States in 1956.
Okay, but I have to, this is a side topic, but we have enough time to dwell into it just a little bit.
Sure.
So if indeed the American intelligence knowingly absorbed to it some Nazi officials and Nazi seniors, I think that what could enable us to distinguish between this phenomenon and the Palestinian movement is the ideology. If, for instance, this person that you mentioned, the head of the Nazi intelligence, was not Nazi in ideology, maybe...
Who was Nazi in
the
ideology?
Person absorbed into the CIA or allowed...
Why would you assume that?
I'm not assuming that. I'm asking you. I'm assuming nothing.
Well, I would assume is that the people interested in absorbing a bunch of Nazis must be Nazis themselves. That's what I would assume. Why not?
Well,
why isn't that the first hypothesis?
It is not the first hypothesis because, first of all, I'm assuming that clandestine police force in any country is extremely powerful. And if such a powerful organization has Nazi bent, it would show up in the 70 years between the end of the war and now. Okay, let's
review that. Because you and I just got done saying that PLO Fatah was created by the exterminator of the European Jews, Haj Amin al-Husseini. Well, PLO Fatah is the organization that the Oslo process brought into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state. Who would do that to the Israeli Jews? only the enemies of the Jews would do that. Why would you bring into the Jewish state, into militarily strategic territory, an organization created by the Nazi butcher of the European Jews?
Professor Gil-White,
isn't that an attack on Israel?
It is, but I must say that I understand what you're going with. It's basically
because the U.S. government did that.
This is where I disagree with you. Historically, I just had a discussion with a nice guy, Israeli leftist, that keenly observed the recent protest within Gaza against Hamas. Are you familiar with it? In the past 24 hours, we see thousands of Gazans, it's not enough, it's something, protesting against Hamas. They still carry, by the way, the logo of the PA on their signs, which says a lot. And they said, look how they demonstrate for peace. And I said, no, dude, they're not demonstrating for peace. They hate us just as much as Hamas do, but they are just a little bit more afraid of us, or of Trump.
Or afraid of Hamas.
My point is that history says, and the book of Yuval Bloomberg, the Oslo Trap, stipulates and proves that the individuals who brought the PLO to the table, the Nazi organization, legitimized it, and against, by the way, the Israeli law, and masterminded the Oslo process, are a bunch of Israelis with that pretext, or with that state of mind. They want peace. Deep in his heart, Arafat wants peace. This was the state of mind. Now, I believe that the CIA pushed for it. But when you have prominent Israelis look the other way on the Nazi bent, on the Nazi inclination of those people, and Americans that do not have any skin on the game, say, okay, they look the other way. Who are us to remind those Jews that they're actually Nazis?
Fine. So let's separate the issues. Yeah. So I'm saying the first hypothesis, when somebody is interested in absorbing tens of thousands of German Nazi war criminals, I say the first hypothesis should be they share an ideology with those Nazis. Otherwise, why would you want them, right?
Okay.
So that should be the first.
I'm going with that. I have my reservation.
Let's put it on the table as a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis.
It's okay, let's go with it.
Now, to test the hypothesis, or to try to see whether the hypothesis is reasonably supported by the evidence, you would want to look at the policies that the people absorbing all those Nazis put in motion. And what are those policies? Well, the most important policy of the U.S. government towards Israel is the Oslo process. And what did they do? They introduced into the Israeli state an organization created by the German Nazis, right? So that's consistent with a Nazi ideology. If you want to hurt the Jews, you would certainly bring into militarily strategic territory an organization created by the German Nazis, right? So I think that's consistent with the hypothesis. Now you say, but what about the people running Israel? That's what you're saying, right? And I'm saying, well, I think that the people who want to destroy the Jewish state would certainly be interested in corrupting the people running the Jewish state, so that they could maneuver the Jewish state into a more vulnerable position that would allow the enemies of the Jewish state to destroy it. So it seems to me that if the evidence shows the people running Israel cooperating with the process to destroy Israel, the first hypothesis should be that the enemies of Israel are managing to corrupt the people running Israel. Why isn't that a reasonable model?
Well, it is a reasonable model. I still have some questions, but we do have a limited time, albeit we have some time. I do want to have enough time to discuss solutions with you.
Yeah.
So you introduced to your colleagues the idea that Nazism, or some branch or some offspring of Nazism, is currently present in the discourse around the Arab-Israeli conflict. How do you think we should move on from there? What should Israeli leaders, what should Israeli voters know about or presume to be doing in the current situation?
Well, I think the first thing that Israeli voters should know is what the PLO Fatah really is. So when the Oslo, I find it very important that the Oslo Accords were approved by a very, very small vote margin. So in the case of Oslo 1, it was just a few votes. And in the case of Oslo 2, it's a one-vote margin. One vote. So it is my contention that if the Israeli public had been informed of the fact that PLO Fatah was a consequence of the German Nazi final solution, that it had been created by the Nazi butcher of the European Jews, if this had been explained to the Israeli Jews, which it wasn't, then I think the vote would have, of course, been an anti-Oslo vote. I mean, it was a one-vote margin. So, and that's not the only thing that was kept from the Israeli public. Israelis were, the Israeli leaders who were negotiating Oslo also did not explain that PLO Fatah is the creator of jihadi Iran.
How is that?
This is the problem. Israelis still don't know this.
Don't know that. Yeah.
They don't know this.
So before you go to Iran, just want to mention one more thing. So I was educated in the settlements. Okay. This is where I went to high school. A very rightist, a very political, politically conservative atmosphere. And what I was taught in my religious high school, somewhere in the peaks of Binyamin, was that the Palestinian movement is a legitimate national movement and with a sprinkle of Marxism. What I can now say is Marxism, in the sense of they suffer from disenfranchisement and oppression from the supremacist Jews.
Right.
This is what I was taught. Now, because I was
Wait a minute, that's what you were told on the right?
Yeah.
On the right, they told you that the problem was supremacist Jews?
Yes, the Israeli Ministry of Education dictated those messages to be taught in the classrooms. Now, I can see my teacher, once again, a religious woman, is feeling uncomfortable with it, but this is what we were taught. Now, the Israeli public was smart enough to vote against those solutions over again. And it's something that you should know. You mentioned the margins about the votings for the two phases of the Oslo process in the government and in the Knesset. The Israeli public voted against. In 1992, when Rabin was elected, he said there will be no Palestinian state, and then he went out to do Oslo. Same with Netanyahu in 1996.
I agree.
Same with Sharon in 2003, who gained the biggest achievement, the biggest electoral achievement for the Likud ever to be held in Israel, and went on against the ideology of his own party to do the disengagement. The Israeli people, even though we were taught what we were taught in the classrooms, we vote against it over and over again, but somehow the deep state manages to implement those.
Okay, so you say somehow and you say deep state, and those kinds of expressions, it seems to me, are consistent with the idea that the people making decisions for the Israeli citizens might be corrupted by Israel's enemies. All right? So
Definitely say deep.
So even the education that Israelis are receiving from the Ministry of Education, as you describe, seems to be designed by Israel's enemies.
Yes.
I mean, if the Arab enemies of Israel had designed the Israeli curriculum, it would look pretty similar to what was actually designed.
No. First of all, we know the Arab curriculum, and one more thing that needs to be added. It's a bit beside what the road that we're taking. I know how it came to be that this is what was I taught. As an adult, I looked into it with many other good people, and we know person. The person is Professor Mota Kremnitzer, who is an extreme leftist. He was at the time a senior, maybe head of the organization called Israel's Democracy Institute, and he was appointed by Shulamit Aloni. I don't know if you're familiar with the, once again, from Meretz, from the extreme left of Israel. She was the Minister of Education. She appointed him to head a committee about the content of the Israeli Ministry of Education curriculum in history and civil studies. And this is how it came to be. The extreme left took over those strategic discoursal points, and this is how it came to be.
But why did they do it?
Because this is their ideology. To say that Shulamit Aloni and Mota Kremnitzer were corrupted by Israeli enemies, I think it's a bit far-reaching.
Well, I haven't said that. I'm saying the behavior is consistent with that hypothesis. I don't know if that's true. But what I'm saying is the thing that we have to explain is why, in the context of the Oslo vote, Israelis, okay, so we have to talk about the historical context is very important. The Jewish state was created to protect the Jewish people from Nazi-style genocide.
This is one of the goals. It's important to emphasize.
It's the most important one.
No, I disagree. No? I strongly disagree with it. The Jewish state is the manifestation of the Jewish nationality of 3,500 years old.
Okay.
This is what it is. And it is beyond collateral benefit that this keeps us safe from anti-Semitism to whatever form, be it Nazism in the 20th century or Inquisition in the 16th century or whatever. It is a collateral benefit, but it is not the essence or the justification for the founding of Israel. This is the national state of the nation that conceived the concept of nationalism and gave it to the world.
So
with,
are
in
you
the Exodus.
saying that Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, was not interested in creating a Jewish state to protect the Jews from violent attacks?
No, I am saying that I'm explicitly saying this was not the essence of the state of Israel in his eyes when you read his writing, without a doubt. The role that the Dreisel...
But I did read his writing. Theodor Herzl, by his own testimony, decided on the idea of a Jewish state after he heard gigantic French crowds yelling death to the Jews on the streets of Paris. So if that's the reason that he decided to produce the idea of the Jewish state, it sounds to me like protecting the Jews from murder was top of mind when he decided.
It is fascinating. Let's dwell into just a few moments. There is no dispute among historians that the motivation for Theodor Herzl to vision the state of Israel was the Dreyfus Affair, and the fact that this was an anti-Semitic proclamation on behalf of the French military and very large portions of the French society as a whole. This was a wake-up call for Theodor Herzl out of his previous ideas about what should be done with the Jewish problem that he experienced himself. His previous solution was complete assimilation, complete denial of Jewish identity. He said, okay, this is not going to work because Alfred Dreyfus was an assimilated Jew.
Right.
So he said, okay, this is not the solution. What is the solution? And then he dwelled in the contemporary writings of his time, which was the highlight of nationality. Maybe not the highlight. It was
but then it seems we agree on the main point. I mean, so the only thing we need to agree on is not whether the Jewish state was created solely to protect the Jews. What we need to agree on, it seems to me, and I think we do agree, is that if you bring an organization created by the Nazi butcher of the European Jews into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state, that is a complete betrayal of the Jewish state.
Not only that, because what I'm saying in this dispute, what is the justification for the state of Israel, is that it is not only safe haven for the Jews, but also manifestation of Jewish nationality. Bringing in those Nazis with their national proclamation is not only against Israel as a safe haven for the Jews, but it is also against Jewish nationality, because the manifestation of their nationality, the sole cause or the sole justification for the existence of their national state is the annihilation of the state of Israel.
Okay, so what we have to explain scientifically, the thing we need a hypothesis for, is why the Israeli public was not told what the origin of PLO Fatah was when they were asked to support the Oslo process.
It was actively muted. It is not only...
It was
actively muted.
It was suppressed. Now, why? What is the reason? How can we explain that the people running the Jewish state did not want Israeli citizens to know that they were bringing German Nazis into militarily strategic territory of Israel?
We started this conversation with the fact that you researched the mental inclination of people who have racist tendencies.
Yes.
When I have dialogues with my leftist friends here from Israel, I understand the tendency. So about a year ago, I had a meeting with the head of the New York City branch of J Street. Are you familiar with J Street? It's like a very extreme leftist Jewish organization in the American politics. And he said during the war, it was a few months after October 7th. And he said, we should have a direct dialogue with Hamas. And I said, why? They're a bunch of anti-Semites, just did what they did. I said, if not with them, with whom will we talk? The left, or at least the Israeli left, is obsessed with having a dialogue with someone. And if this is the case, they have every motivation, every mental...
Fine, have a dialogue, but why lie about the people you want to have a dialogue with? Why protect German Nazis? If you are leading the Jewish state, how does it make any sense that you would protect people who have a German Nazi past? And that's not all of it, because... the other thing that people in Israel don't know is that PLO Fatah created jihadi Iran. We were talking about this a second
let's move
ago.
on, because this is the fact that
this is very important. Because if you wanted to argue that, well, maybe they with the passage of time they changed, they didn't change. In the 1970s, PLO Fatah armed and trained Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas in training camps in Lebanon. And these guerrillas are the ones that fought the Iranian Revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini was so grateful to Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas that as soon as he was installed in power, he sent an airplane over to pick them up and bring them to Tehran to celebrate with him. Arafat was received by the Iranian crowds as the Mahdi, as the Muslim version of the Mashiach. The PLO helped the Iranians to build their jihadi terror infrastructure, right? So not only are these people the German Nazis, these people are the jihadi Iranians. That was also kept from the Israeli public. Nobody explained. This is front page of the New York Times in 1979. And then just a few years later, right around 1982, 1983, nobody mentioned this again. It was also suppressed, okay? So the people running Israel were not telling the Israeli Jews that they were bringing an organization created by the German Nazi final solution and itself the creator of jihadi Iran, which promises to repeat the final solution in Israel. This was a tremendous attack on Israel. So how do we explain, what is the hypothesis that will explain that the people running Israel, when they're going to have a vote in the Knesset about bringing this organization into Israel, a vote that had a one-vote margin, they don't want Israeli citizens to know that these are the German Nazis, that these are the jihadi Iranians? What explains that?
Well, as I said, I have my own explanation that sits within the mental tendencies of the people involved. Okay, they see their own ideological fulfillment in having this dialogue, and if the person you are dialoguing with is a Nazi, then there is no way to justify the dialogue itself. So the motivation is, as I said, to suppress those uncomfortable facts. Okay. And we know that this practice of denial, your origins in psychology, so I believe that you are quite familiar with the mental mechanisms of denying things that you are uncomfortable with. In the mental level, in the cognitive level, people ignore facts that contradict the main course of what they're doing.
Fine, but it seems to me that if we're talking about the Goyim, if we're talking about non-Jews, right? Just to come back to my own experience, right? So when I saw this evidence and I decided, well, this is entirely relevant to the interpretation of the Arab-Israeli conflict, somebody ought to say it. So I wrote an article, published it, and then it got republished in Arutz Sheva, in Israel National News, with all of the footnotes and the documentation. The consequence of publishing that article is that I was fired from the University of Pennsylvania, right? So the people who had hired me, who thought I was some kind of academic star because they loved my theory of racism and so forth, these people, when I published information embarrassing to the Arab-Palestinian movement, they fired me. Before they fired me, they started pressuring me. They're saying, "Oh, you can't say this." I said to them, look, if I made a mistake, if I even exaggerated something, show me the documentation that refutes me and I'll retract myself.
You responded like an academic.
Like an academic. I will retract myself in public if I'm wrong, right? And they said, your documentation is impeccable, but you can't say this. And they fired me. So since we're talking about a Goyim, forgive me, a Goyish power structure, right? A power structure controlled ultimately by non-Jews, in a non-Jewish country, the temptation there would be to say, well, these are enemies of the Jewish people. They're enemies of the Jewish people and they're enemies of the Jewish state, and that's why they don't want a prominent academic at an Ivy League university in a think tank that studies ethnic conflict to be exposing the history of PLO Fatah, right? And I think the obvious hypothesis there is that the problem is anti-Semitism. Should we change the obvious hypothesis merely because we are speaking about the rulers of Israel? Or can we at least put on the table the hypothesis that the anti-Semites outside of Israel are corrupting the power structure in Israel? Because when I look at everything that has happened in Israel, and it's not just the left. You were speaking about the psychology of the left, but forgive me, but the Israeli prime ministers and other political figures on the right have not canceled Oslo. Yeah. They have run repeatedly on the platform that they will cancel Oslo, and then the minute they are elected, they turn around and they betray their campaign promises.
It's a bit more complicated. It's not as if they withhold Oslo. It's not the case. The legal structure that Oslo have created is something that well, I believe that we can live without. I believe that we should take over the entire territory and basically implement our sovereignty over there. But even in the right, people who do not support Oslo as ideology, even people who believe that we would have been better off if Oslo would have not have occurred, now believe that the least harmful alternative is to maintain the legal and maybe political structure of the Palestinian Authority, which is the child of the Oslo process.
But see, the problem here, for me, the scientific problem, is that if Oslo passed by a one-vote margin, which it did, that means that if the leaders of the right had bothered to inform the Israeli public about the history of PLO Fatah, they could have defeated Oslo before it happened. Yet, they did not inform the Israeli public. In fact, Yitzhak Shamir and Benjamin Netanyahu are the ones responsible in the Madrid Peace Conference of 1991 for initiating negotiations with PLO Fatah. So not only is it true that the Israeli right has not opposed Oslo, but in fact, you could say they initiated the entire diplomatic train that produced Oslo. So, and in so doing, they collaborated with the leftist agenda also, which is to keep this key information from the Israeli public. So why are they doing that?
I'm going to give you one answer, and then I would like to discuss solutions.
Right.
So I know, because I'm learning history, and many in the Israeli right now know those facts, know that in its essence the Palestinian idea is a Nazi idea. It was an illegitimate thing to say because, let's say, in the late 80s and early 90s in Israel, there were still many Holocaust survivors among us. And to them, to mention the Nazi name in any context other than directing your finger specifically to Nazism was something that was supposed to be unheard of. Now, when you say Haj Amir al-Husseini was a Nazi, you are not saying it as an allegory. But since
it's literally true.
It's a historical, relevant fact. It's extremely relevant to the conflict. But it was very easy to suppress it in a climate when you cannot say Nazi against anything which is not Nazism itself as it was in Germany.
Okay, but the problem for me, here's the problem.
This is censorship, by the way.
Right.
And it costs us a lot.
Absolutely. But see, the problem for me is that I can tell you how Israel could have been saved all the pain of the last few decades that began with the Oslo process. All that Shamir needed to do in 1991, when he was being pressured to go to Madrid, was call a live press conference. Because in a live press conference, the media is going to show up because they don't know what you're going to say. If Shamir had said, I'm going to make an important announcement about the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? And so everybody gathers to see what he's going to say. It's being transmitted live, so they can't edit it. And they're all going to show up because Israel is always front page news everywhere. And what Shamir then says is, I'm being pressured to open negotiations with PLO Fatah. This is never going to happen because PLO Fatah was created by the Nazi butcher of the European Jews, and PLO Fatah created jihadi Iran, which wants to repeat that crime in Israel. And he has the Israeli government publish the information on this, spread it all over the world, and that minute the prestige of the PLO Fatah is completely destroyed, and it becomes impossible to do the Oslo process. The Oslo process, which was approved by one vote. So that press conference was sufficient to change one vote. In fact, I think it would have changed all the votes to go against the Oslo process.
So in 2016,
why didn't the leaders of Israel on the right, at least the people on the right, tell Israelis the truth?
To me, it's clear, because such a message would either be mocked by Israeli media or ignored.
So what? Let them mock it. You produce the documentation.
At the time, and to some extent, even until 2020 or so, the control of the Israeli left was over the media. Their control, you say he would have do it live on live broadcast.
That's why I gave you this example.
It is still being framed by the local media. In 2011, when Netanyahu went up and made a speech in Congress in 2011, not 2015.
Yeah.
So I watched the speech being brought live in Israeli Channel 2, which was the main outlet at the time, and translated to Hebrew by the host. by the hostess, and she manipulated the translation.
Fine, but see, but the problem is still, why wasn't it tried? Because all you have to change is one vote. So you would have to believe that the Israeli media is so powerful and so anti-Israel, you would also have to believe that when the Israeli Prime Minister calls a live press conference to explain that PLO Fatah is really the German Nazis and jihadi Iran rolled into one, and that they're proposing to give this organization militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state, you would have to believe that the Israeli media is so anti-Israel and so powerful that you can't change one vote in the Knesset. So the question that is in my mind is, why wasn't this at least attempted?
First of all, I would say that as for the Israeli media being so powerful, without hesitation, I would say yes, it is so powerful. And it is so powerful to the point that I cannot even tell you that it was not attempted. It might have been so and have been effectively suppressed.
No.
Okay, so in 2016...
there was no press conference to explain the nature of PLO Fatah. What Shamir did is he took Netanyahu with him to the Madrid Peace Conference because he didn't get along with David Levy, who was the foreign minister at the time. Netanyahu was the undersecretary. So he took Netanyahu to Madrid, and in Madrid, they opened negotiations for the first time with PLO Fatah. They broke the sacred taboo of Israeli politics, which prohibited any conversation with PLO Fatah.
So
they didn't inform
I can
the
say
Israeli
that there is a book, I don't know if it was published in English, but in Hebrew it is available. It's called the Oslo Trap, written by Yuval Bloomberg, who dived into the archives and saw the way that extreme leftist activists such as Yossi Beilin, who at the time was the Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, and Yair, I forgot the names, but it's in the book, and how they managed to manipulate Rabin, who opposed the Palestinian state, into negotiating Arafat against his will. Rabin at the time negotiated with more moderate, clan-oriented personalities in the Arab population of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. And what Beilin did, according to this book of Bloomberg, he went to Washington and somehow delegitimized the dialogue that Rabin had with those moderate counterparts. So Israelis went on to do that in Washington.
Yeah, but what about Shamir?
What about Shamir Netanyahu? I'm not familiar with this specific chapter of history, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to look into it, and maybe we'll be in touch about that.
Good.
Solutions. What, apart from educating the Israeli population about the Nazi origin of the Palestinian movement, what else from you as a person who comes from the outside, unbiasedly researching our most burning conflict, or maybe even the world most burning conflict in the past half a century, what would be the message? What needs to be done? What advice would you give Israeli government and Israeli public?
Well, I think if I were giving advice, I would say Israelis need to identify which candidate, which person proposing to become prime minister is promising to clean house, because what I see is that the top generals, the people running the media, the people running the executive, whether they call themselves leftists or rightists, they've all been suppressing this key information from the Israeli public. You just told me that you were hearing for the first time about the key role of PLO Fatah in the creation of jihadi Iran. So, and I believe you're hearing it for the first time, because I made a trip to Israel many years ago, about 12 years ago, to give conferences here on the relationship, on the historical relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran. And the people in my audience were all leaders of different movements of the Israeli right, the small, very patriotic movements on the Israeli right. And none of them remembered this. Even though it was explained in the newspapers, the front page of the New York Times, and even though these are people very worried about Iran, very worried about PLO Fatah, very concerned about the security of the Israeli state, they didn't remember this. Yeah. So what this means is that it has not been publicly discussed in Israel. The things I was fired for at the University of Pennsylvania are not being discussed in public in Israel. So I would say you need to find someone who does talk about these things and who is promising to clean house, because it is obvious that quite generally the people running Israel are not really defending Israel. Now, we need a good model to explain why not. And I think the hypothesis of corruption needs to be taken seriously. There has been, in the last few weeks, we have seen a controversy emerge in Israel where there have been accusations that Qatar has been paying people in the Israeli government. And, well, Qatar is Hamas's sugar daddy. Qatar is the main financier of anti-Semitic jihadi terrorism. So this is a very serious accusation, right?
Yeah.
The state that is trying to extinguish the Jewish state in genocide is, according to these accusations,
is involved in the Israeli government.
Is involved in Israeli politics.
It's an accusation. It's a harsh accusation. The Israeli public currently doesn't believe it so easily. But,
no, fine. But I'm saying that the fact that these accusations are now flying, I think, means that we are now in a public climate where this hypothesis can be put on the table, and I think it should be. And I think we should investigate how long this might have been going on, because I think the hypothesis of corruption is actually a pretty good hypothesis to explain why the Oslo process happened in the first place and why the key information that could have stopped it was suppressed from the Israeli public, and why it is still not being discussed today. All of the people who claim to oppose the Oslo process are still not informing Israeli citizens about the history of PLO Fatah, which is a history that would completely destroy the prestige of PLO Fatah, at least within Israel, and would create the political support for expelling this organization from Israeli soil.
To summarize, first of all, the Israeli public needs to be educated about the Nazi origins of our counterparts.
Absolutely.
Second of all, there needs to be an investigation about the motivation of many Israeli personalities and organizations and political movements to legitimize and to clear the Palestinian movement out of this completely proven and completely based accusation about its affiliation with the Nazi Party. And the thesis that you bring to the table is maybe some entity, some organization with connection to the Nazi Party itself has motivated via or through financial means those Israeli figures to do that.
Right.
This is a very interesting insight, very interesting angle to view the past few decades and the way that the conflict was managed. I must admit that for me, as someone who is to some extent involved as a journalist and as an activist in Israel, it brings up some questions, because I don't need corruption or financial corruption to explain the motivations and the inclinations of the people on the other political side. I understand what's going on in their minds. They explained it to me quite right. And I cannot believe that so many people are on the payroll of Qatar or whomever. Okay,
so maybe we need a more complex model. So maybe some people have been corrupted and other people have been given a false narrative by the people who have been corrupted. Right?
So that makes more sense. It also aligns with your story and similar stories in American academia. And, what is supposed to be the stronghold of freedom of expression, free and free mind. How come that you experience what you've experienced? And the answer is, well, we know that Qatar and other oil empires are heavily invested in the American academia. And the result of that is that it is way easier to get tenureship, to get senior positions in the academia if your work supports, be it the ideology or the interests. PLO Fatah. And in general, Marxist ideology that weakens the West in general. So for instance, when China and Russia invest in an American university, they do it in a manner that inclines motivation for researchers to support ideologies that strengthens them in issues of climate, in issues of family structure, and in issues of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Okay, so anyway, just to complete the answer, what advice I would give to Israelis, I would say it is urgent to cancel Oslo, completely cancel Oslo, and that means, as you said, to expel PLO Fatah, not just Hamas, expel the terrorist organizations that want to kill all the Jews from the Jewish state. It's intolerable that they're here. They shouldn't be here. If they don't want to leave and they insist in fighting, then you have to kill them, right? So that's canceling Oslo. I would recommend that Qatar be destroyed. Right?
Destroyed, completely destroyed. You say that
why not?
Israel should wage war upon Qatar?
Well, of course. Who attacked Israel on October 7th. It was Qatar. Qatar created the Hamas terrorist infrastructure in Gaza.
Qatar, not Iran. It's more, common here.
Both of them. I think Iran should also be destroyed, right? So, well, destroyed is the wrong. Is perhaps the wrong emphasis. They should be liberated. What needs to be destroyed is the ruling elites, right? So the ruling elite of Qatar is actually oppressing a large population of slaves in Qatar. All of those slaves would be liberated. So if the ruling elite of Qatar is destroyed, then something like 2 million slaves would be immediately liberated. The Iranian people would also be liberated. They don't want to be ruled by the Ayatollahs. They've made that clear. So if Israel destroys the ruling elite of Iran, they will have the thanks, the gratitude of millions of Iranians. If Israel liberates Syria, the same thing happens. Lebanon, I think Israel will have secure borders when it liberates the countries around Israel.
Well, Professor,
finally, the last piece of advice I would give is Israel absolutely needs to invest in weapons independence.
Yeah.
The fact that Israel has to beg the U.S. to send it weapons means that it is at the whim of U.S. foreign policy. And as we've seen, U.S. foreign policy is anti-Israeli. So Israel urgently needs weapons independence so that it doesn't have to have its foreign policy subordinated to whatever the anti-Semites that run the State Department want Israel to do.
Okay, so first of all, this last point is another one that we need and should elaborate about, but our time's up. So before we say goodbye, I'd like to say a few words about where can our audiences find more content.
Thank you.
In other podcasts and other resources that you may suggest.
Well, so if people want to see the entire corpus of content that we have, not only defending Israel, but explaining the geopolitical framework that we are living in right now, and also the historical analysis of how we got here, they can find it at managementofreality.com or franciscogilwhite.com, and that will take them to videos, articles, books, everything.
Fascinating. So first of all, thank you very much for your fresh viewpoint about the conflict. It is, we are to some extent stuck in an echo chamber of opinions and views, either of ours as Israeli rightists or of our counterparts in the Israeli left. And it's very refreshing to see someone who did not grow in the same, in the same field as us, developing independently ideas which are quite similar. We have our differences, but without a doubt, your educated viewpoint was very contributing to the discussion as a whole. Thank you very much for being with us, and I'd like to thank our audiences as well, and to encourage you not only to visit the aforementioned resources that Professor Gil-White just recommended, but also the other content here that we have at Tov TV in English, various outlets. I'm Ziv Maor. Thank you very much for being with us, and until next time, have a good one.